Hello, El Paso. Welcome to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, where we share the fun of the big questions with you. My name is Dr. Kim Diaz, and I teach philosophy here at EPCC.
And my name is Jules Simon, and I'm a philosopher at the University of Texas, El Paso.
Today we have Jay Stratton, who, for the last 7 years, Jay has worked as a professor of theater at the University of Texas at El Paso, where his research has focused on the reinvention of classical theater, utilizing found spaces, non-traditional structures, and bilingual text. Jay adapts and reframes classical material to heighten its value for 21st century audiences. In line with his research, Jay is the co-adapter and creator of Utep's acclaimed bilingual A Christmas Carol and La Frontera. Now in its second season, Jay is the producing artistic director of the Madeleine Park Shakespeare Festival, which adapts and reconceives the works of the bard into productions that are fun, family-friendly, and free for all El Pasoans. You can find out more about Jay's productions by visiting EPCC TV's YouTube channel and read his bio in the description box. So, do you do it in Spanglish?
You're asking about Christmas Carol?
Right.
Yeah, well, yes, it's set on the border, Christmas Carol, and so the story actually rolls back and forth from El Paso to Juarez, and so Benito Scrooge, Ebenezer Scrooge, is from Juarez, but he has sort of turned his back for financial reasons on his background, right? And so the story is, the traditional story of Christmas Carol is about Ebenezer Scrooge, like rediscovering his love of Christmas and his love of tradition and family. And we, in Christmas Carol and La Frontera, we echo the same story, but we also have him reclaim his ethnic identity, and so finally at the end, he's been in a tug of war with his very Spanish-speaking Roberto Cratchit, his clerk, and at the very end, he finally says to him, Feliz Navidad. And that's sort of when the chickens come home to roost, and you get the full value of the story that we've been unpacking for the 2 hours of our version of Christmas Carol, which we're hoping in a year or two will make a comeback. It took a break during the pandemic.
Okay. We have this colleague, Mariana Alessandri. She wrote this article, is Spanglish feo? And feo is ugly. And so, right, because it's a mix of a lot of people, it's not pure English, it's not pure Spanish, it's what we speak here in La Frontera. We go back and forth and mix words.
Sure.
We officially, I think, linguists call it code switching. But, I mean, it's what we do here. So from these two perspectives, English and Spanish, a lot of people say, that's not how you say it. You don't say, me voy a parquear. You say, me voy a estacionar. Or whatever, right? And so,
yeah.
So then her question is Spanglish feo? And the reason we wanted to talk with you is because of all your background in theater, in the arts. And I want to bring it back to the main question. From your perspective, what is beauty? How can we define beauty? What do you think?
That is a super interesting question, and I would love it if I had some kind of very clear, pat answer.
Too. That's why we're speaking to the experts.
If you find one, you should bring them in.
Maybe we're still looking, Jack.
So as a theater artist, specifically, primarily a director, also sometimes a writer, but mostly I'm a director. I don't think a whole lot about my craft is not in the creation of beauty most of the time. It's in the creation of story, in the creation of storytelling. Now, can storytelling be beautiful? Absolutely, but that isn't. I rarely look at a piece of work and say, how can I expose the beauty in this? In fact, usually what I'm looking to expose is the conflict. I'm trying to find and reveal the conflict. What is the push and pull, the tug of war in any given moment, in any given scene? And then I hope that in total the experience for an audience is exciting, clear, moving. I don't very often ask the question, did an audience member who comes to my show see something beautiful, right? In the way that I assume my colleagues in dance probably do, right? Melissa Melpignano, I'm positive that, although I don't mean to put words in her mouth, but I would assume that when she puts on a piece of dance, one of the questions she might ask is it beautiful, right? And as a theater practitioner, I don't ask that question very often. I recently produced in Sunset Heights there's a new theater company in town called Teatro in the Planta. I want to give a little shout out to them because they're doing some really interesting, exciting, and engaging work. Directed a play for them by Stephen Adly Gurgis. The play is very much about infidelity, people struggling to recover from addiction. There's violence in it. There's a lot of foul language. And it was an extremely exciting project to work on. And we did it in this really innovative way where the audience moved from room to room. And it was extremely in your face, right? And I never once asked the question, did they see something beautiful? And in fact, tons of people, because it was a very successful production, and tons of people came up to me and said very gracious words of kindness about it. And I don't think I ever heard beautiful once. And since you sent me the email, I've been thinking, when we create theater, are we creating beauty? We're telling stories, and the result of that may on some level be beautiful. So it's interesting. From a theater perspective, I don't think about beauty that often. I will say this, I spent the summer in northern Utah producing a play way up in Logan, Utah, and I would just objectively say the place where I was living was beautiful. We were surrounded in snow-capped mountains, towering pine trees, gorgeous rivers, all seen at a great distance. I remember thinking a lot, wow, this is so beautiful. And I would think that 90% of people would perceive that, maybe even 100, maybe everyone, maybe that's programmed into us, that's in our DNA. That when we look at that distant mountain and that gorgeous, tree lines and snow-capped peaks, and we hear the rivers, and that we can't help but respond with a sense of beauty to that. And I do think that's kind of in our human nature. And I remember while I was directing this very funny comedy that was quite crass and really silly and really funny, and thinking, here I am creating art that I wouldn't remotely describe as beautiful, and I'm looking out my window and seeing this phenomenal vista. All of which is to say, I think I'm going to be pretty bad at answering your question.
All right. Do you have a follow-up?
I do.
Because I have more.
Yeah, so often we think of beauty as kind of a visual phenomenon.
I certainly do.
Right.
Even though I'm very aware that is actually somewhat of a narrow mindset.
A narrow mindset, right? So, and this kind of fuses in with the next question. So what is aesthetics? Because what you're describing is, generally speaking, a much broader understanding of the aesthetic experience. But, our experiences can be beautiful.
Absolutely.
Like, for instance, the Christmas Carol on the Border in La Frontera, some people might say, what a beautiful ending. For him to come to this insight, this transformation, is a beautiful movement in his character development. And it's something that is, I would love to see that happen again, and I'm going to take my family to see it again. And one of those reasons why is because it's going to fill you with these harmonizing, beautiful sort of emotions or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. The term aesthetics is really interesting as an artist.
Yeah, because everything you've been describing obviously fits into the broader category of aesthetics, right?
Yes.
What is our sensual engagement in the world?
Yeah.
And, how
And
does
then
that work?
also, not just, going back to stage, right? The costumes, the makeup, the lights, the sounds. There's so much there, right? That is beautiful. Again, not always, but it's always trying to create this experience of, I think, beauty. I don't know.
It is interesting. As a director, and I will actually say I'm currently working on Utep's next production, which is Metamorphoses, the Mary Zimmerman adaptation of the Ovid Tales of Transformation. And it is, to kind of try and circle all these together, I would describe it as outside of my personal aesthetic as a creative artist, because when I read it, I am not immediately drawn to the conflict in it. It is a set of stories, and there is conflict in every story, of course, but there is, like, as I read it, I don't say my first obligation is to put on the stage shocking conflict. It reads much more like a play that wants to be beautiful. There's beauty in the language. There's beauty in the images as the narrators describe them. It is much more, for lack of a better word, lyrical than the kind of play I normally direct and the style in which I normally direct. And so it has been a departure for me to come into these situations and say, oh wow, all these people have to turn into birds now. And we have to make it look beautiful, right? All these people, they have to transform into birds and we have to make it beautiful. And so I say, then what I need are people who do this better than me. And so I go and I find a choreographer, and I go and I find music, and I go and find a lighting designer for sure, and I go and I find costume designers, and I say, here's how I think this moment needs to be revealed. Let's make it beautiful. And at the end of the day, I mostly sit back and try and coordinate
You're still orchestrating, right? So you have a sense for beauty, for what is going to be appealing.
Yes, certainly, but it isn't my aesthetic is to go for the shocking, to go for the daring, the funny, for sure, the tightly paced. I will teach directing students that one of the first questions one needs to ask is, what is the central conflict in this moment? What question is the audience trying to answer? Can so-and-so achieve X, Y, or Z? I don't know, whatever. And something told me from the very first moment I read this play that my usual bag of tricks would not serve, and that the story, in fact, needed to be revealed more beautifully and less kind of jarringly, suddenly, less focus on comedy, though all those things are there, but they're there less so. There's more kind of, this one takes a much gentler touch than I would say people would say, oh, as a theater maker, Jay's aesthetic is X, Y, or Z. This isn't that. This lives in a different space, so it's been interesting. And I have, for the first time in a long time, had to really look at a play and think, what is beautiful about this moment, rather than what is exciting about this moment. I would say that what is exciting about this moment is my normal aesthetic.
I have more questions. So, like the MF with the hat.
Yes. Inconvenient title.
So this guy, I wish I could have watched it, right? Does this guy manage to overcome his addiction, and how does it end? And the reason I'm asking is, so the broader question is conflict beautiful? Because clearly the character is struggling with addiction.
Yes.
With right?
Right.
A divorce you mentioned, or, so.
Well, I mean, the associated question is, does the conflict result in some kind of beautiful consequence or some kind of resolution that we can say,
Like Scrooge, right? Where Scrooge.
Sure.
Need we say more, right? But there's growth.
Absolutely. I mean, that is the classic Christmas tale, and I think that one has a beautiful ending. You see this person have one more chance at living a beautiful finale to his life. And in the case of the one that Dr. Adriana Dominguez and I created, to also re-embrace his roots, his heritage, and his language. And I do think that is why we return over and over again to that story. It certainly makes us feel good. And I guess we can choose to use the word, beautiful to describe the conclusion, and many people would, and that's a matter of personal taste. But as the creator of it, that isn't what I was focused on when Dr. Dominguez and I were making it. I was focused on, okay, if this character moves into Spanish at this moment, it will mean something, but if they move into Spanish at this moment, it will mean that much more. And we'll see this character, Roberto Cratchit, who speaks English very poorly in our conception of it, we'll see him at the end really trying to speak in English, and then Scrooge will navigate into Spanish, and that's where they will meet, and we'll finally see the hostility set aside. And I guess my hope is that the audience perceives it as beautiful, but I never perceived it as beautiful. I perceived it as sort of craftsmanship, or you know what I mean? Like, I kind of didn't, I wasn't able to step back and look at it as beautiful until literally opening night. And I looked around and went and saw the audience's response and said, "Oh, I guess that must have been beautiful." Like in the same way, I suppose, when a comedian writes a complicated joke, right? They're putting levers in place that in their experience work, and then they find out whether it was funny when they get the laugh or not. I think.
Well, and part of it is in coming to terms with what's beautiful and what's not. What's jarring or what's perhaps described as ugly or something like that, is you as a director directing the audience to come to the experience of making a judgment. So the audience has to judge something. They're coming to the point where they're gonna make a decision about the consequence or effects of this stream of experiences that happen on the stage, right?
Right.
And if it results in this experience where Feliz Navidad is the expression, and everybody's feeling, finally he came back there, and let's watch it again, or let's take our kids again. This is such a beautiful story, and there's this conflict in the beginning, and it's just like our lives here, only it's this adaptation, and it has such a beautiful ending, because one then is led to the making of the judgment, right? Because if you say something's beautiful, you're asking somebody to judge with you, right?
Right, by definition.
And agree, right? That's beautiful, isn't it? Or
right, and
that
actually,
was ugly. That was just upsetting.
But I want to talk about conflict and drama and tragedy. So conflict. Can conflict be beautiful?
Uh-huh.
Can I'm thinking tragedies like, for instance, Madame Butterfly, right? I don't think there's anything in the end. There's nothing good. Well, is there anything like, there's no happily forever after. There's no Hollywood ending. Is that beautiful?
Yeah, when everybody dies on the stage, You know, or
Sure.
Tragedy, can tragedy be beautiful? What do you think?
I think tragedy can absolutely be beautiful if we are moved by it. It's tricky because when we talk about tragedy, usually we're talking about it in the context of opera, the experience of which is probably beautiful. I mean, the very nature of opera, we go to hear beautiful music, right? We go to hear this beautiful stuff.
oh, and the sets are beautiful.
And the sets are beautiful and the costumes are beautiful.
Right.
Or we are frequently talking about tragedy in the context of the classics, meaning Shakespeare being sort of the great name, but there are a million others, including the Spanish Golden Age and Calderon and so part of the beauty comes from the quality of the language itself, which is a very outdated notion, but the idea that you can go and listen to the language and just experience beauty that way, right? I mean, what is the uber kind of tragedy of the English-speaking world is Hamlet, right? Well, a great portion of the value of Hamlet is the quality of the language, right? Which is by and large written in a verse structure, and so we experience the tragedy, but we experience it riding on this vehicle that is really quite beautiful if done well. And so I definitely think that tragedy can be beautiful. But again, the interesting thing is the audience might experience it as beautiful. The actor playing Hamlet probably isn't experiencing it as beauty. The director is probably not experiencing it as beauty. I'm not sure about maybe the lighting designer or something, if they are, when they get it all and they're like, yeah, that's maybe. But I think their techniques, they're probably not thinking about the creation of beauty. They're probably thinking about the creation of, I need enough light here that we can see the actor's mouth so that the audience doesn't lose interest, or, something like that. They're probably thinking in more technical aspects. So, I mean, that as a creative theater artist, that is a fascinating thing to me, and that my hope is that the audience has a beautiful experience. I don't assume that any of the craftspeople involved are going to have a beautiful experience. They're working. You know what I mean? In the same way that, if you go and you buy a beautiful garment, right? You get to wear it and experience it as beautiful, and hopefully the people looking at you will think that it's beautiful. But the people who designed it, made it, et cetera, for them,
do you think
craft.
Okay, but then even craft can have a sense of beauty, right? Like you mentioned, because you said, I am drawing the conflict, drawing attention to it, and so then when the audience reacts the way that I was hoping, then I know that I have done, well, you didn't say those words, but it worked. And so then there is this sense of a job well done. And and that is a sense of maybe not beautiful, right? But it's a satisfaction that you put this production together well, and was it beautiful? There's an aesthetic sense of this is well done.
Yeah, satisfaction though is different than beauty, though. I would contend that I can be satisfied with something, and that would be a kind of level of production and completion that would I'd feel settled about. But with beauty, I think beauty is a different sort of phenomenon that draws our attention to precisely this cooperation of the viewer, or of someone else who's involved. I mean, we want to create something that's going to elicit these kinds of judgment makings. That's what I was getting at, right? And so people then would pass this around like this was a beautiful sort of experience and we want to have it again. And there's this kind of repetition involved. But satisfaction is built into this kind of this individual sense of self, right? I'm satisfied
Right,
with it. I'm
but
at peace with it or
nevertheless, it keeps bringing you back, right? It keeps, because you draw, it feels good, there's aesthetic to it, right? You keep coming back and directing more plays. There's that satisfaction, that feeling of, I'm doing a good job. As your craft, you keep perfecting it into, and that aim for perfection, right? Or getting better at it. There is a sense of, I'm going to sound very platonic, right? But the good and the beautiful, that you are approximating, the sense of growth in yourself as an artist, right?
Certainly, yeah.
Right? Getting better at your craft is satisfying, and it keeps bringing you back. And there's, beauty may not be, but if I'm welding, right, I like to knit. So I can tell you, some things are not well done, but some things are approximate my ideal, and so then I can say it's beautiful.
Well, you might say it's useful.
No, it's beautiful.
I can still wrap it around my neck.
Yeah, well, he gets to wear everything that, all my mistakes, right? But when I give something that I'm proud of, and the more I do it, the better I get, right? So,
I have a couple great friends at Utep that probably your viewers know a little bit, Brian Downen and Sherry Duke. And they're both extremely accomplished singers, opera singers, and they can sing more than just opera. But and I wonder, because of course when they sing, overwhelmingly an audience goes, "Oh, that was beautiful." Oh, I do it. I hear them sing and I go, "Oh, that was so beautiful."
Mm-hmm.
But is that their experience of it, right? Or in fact, does their craftsmanship require sort of letting go of that, I'm going to use the term third ear, right? The part of them that would be listening to them going, does this sound nice? Does this sound nice? And they're so busy managing all their physiological levers to produce those incredible sounds, and probably their psychological levers too, because surely what is the voice except a way to reveal our own interior life? And so if you don't have some kind of an interior life in place, the voice won't reveal anything except perhaps just technique. And I do wonder if when they are singing their absolute A game, when they're just crushing it, which I've heard them do, and it is amazing, are they going, "Oh, this is so beautiful," or are they too busy sort of going, "Lift the diaphragm, make sure the soft palate is up. Okay, now bring the soft palate down. Now shift this emotional part of myself to reveal a different color in my voice." You know what I mean?
You must know as an artist, because you know when you hit the right note. You know when your craft worked and when it didn't.
Certainly, yeah. I do remember really well, back when I lived in New York City, I had an audition for Theseus in Midsummer Night's Dream at a nice professional gig. And I looked at the material and I sort of said, I do feel pretty strongly connected to this. It's not a high stakes moment in the show. The Theseus is just sort of generically, I think it was written to cover a costume change way back in 98 or whatever. I think it was written to cover a costume change, but Theseus is talking about, it's a very famous, the lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. And I read it, and there's not a lot of conflict in it. There's a little, but not much, and it's not filled with dramatic action. But it's quite beautiful. And I started the audition. I got a little ways into it, and I could tell it wasn't happening. And then I just proceeded to give the best audition of my professional career. I just delivered this monologue in a way that I just knew I am now really not going after the conflict, but I'm serving the musical quality of the words, and I'm delivering up. And the salty, salty old casting director, I got to the end of it, and the salty old casting director went, oh. And I knew that I had delivered something beautiful. And I still think of it as maybe my single finest. And I didn't book it. I didn't get the show. But that's beside the point, actually. And yet the whole time I was doing it, I never perceived it. I knew I was doing well. As actors say, I knew I was very connected to the material. I was deeply connected to the language in that moment. But I didn't perceive it as beautiful while I was doing it. And had Paul Fouquet, the casting director, not let out that involuntary sort of little sound, I don't know how I might have remembered it. I'd be telling you about it, you know. It just, from that moment I went, oh my gosh, I just created beauty. But I didn't know it without the response of my, you know, professionally present audience member there.
This is a good segue into, so we've been talking aesthetics, right? Generally, so beauty in the context of aesthetics, because all of the other kinds of experiences you're describing generally fit into the category of aesthetics. What is my aesthetic experience of something? You know, how my experience, my voice, the tonal quality, the kind of sensual engagement with the material and all that. But then this last experience that you described about your most beautiful moment entailed this other phenomenon that we get to with number 4 about this notion of appreciating something. So you knew that there was a judgment being made because you heard the sigh of appreciation.
Yes.
Right? And in some ways, appreciation goes along with whatever you're doing in the theater, because the audience either appreciates or doesn't appreciate the craft, the production, the direction, right? What do you think about appreciation? How essential is that something that you think about as a director?
Yes.
You know, in terms of both the actors you're working with, the set people, and the audience. Like
Yes.
Who's doing all the appreciating?
I came up in a very sort of showbiz model of training and learning, and my earliest experiences in theater were very much taught by people who would say things like, the director is the primary advocate for the audience. The first member of the shared experience, right? Because the actors are going to tend to serve the moment, or serve themselves in the moment, or serve, I don't mean themselves. What I mean is they're going to serve their characters in that
role,
moment.
Right.
Hamlet, the actor playing Hamlet is the first advocate for the character of Hamlet, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The director is the one person in the room who has to step up, and they've got to say, are we serving the audience? That's very much how I was taught. And, you know, casual slogans like, I remember, you know, as a kid being at a summer stock and saying, well, but is that a cheap laugh? And the director turned to me and said, it's only cheap if it doesn't work, right? I deeply think about, maybe to a fault, I'm an audience serving director. And in fact, I think in some ways, the current project that I'm working on, Metamorphoses by Mary Zimmerman, is challenging me because it asks for something a little different than that. And I'm not, I can't grab it in the same way. I sort of have to see it out of the side of my eye rather than looking straight at it and saying, well, the laugh is on this line. If you set it up this way, you'll get that laugh. If I have this person move on that moment, we're going to kill that laugh. That's a craft I understand extremely well. Whereas sort of conjuring the spells that this particular project asks for, much more challenging to me.
That particular laugh is setting up a different sort of experience that's coming later, in other words.
Right.
You know, so you don't want the staccato, you know, one punchline after another.
Which often you do, but
Yeah,
not in this show.
And not exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And in fact, if I go for easy conflict and quick laughs early, the audience is going to feel pandered to by the end when I'm asking them to observe something
deeper,
more beautiful. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is really, truly one of the first shows where I've just said, gosh, we have to make this moment beautiful. And I've said that like 6 times, you know, as opposed to saying, I'm going to rely on the revelation of the heart of the story. And you'd think they wouldn't be different, but somehow on a granular level, they are.
Yeah, so we've come a long way already in a half an hour, Jay, because you totally disavowed any connection to beauty at all in the way you, the way you promote your craft or the way you understand your craft making as a director. And here you're working on a project that is challenging your understanding of beauty, right?
Yes, and it's very much not the... okay, there are elements of it that make it the kind of thing I take on, which is to say it's sourced classically. Mary Zimmerman wrote it in the mid-90s, but it is, you know, it's these Greek myths brought to life by Ovid, who was a Roman poet, I believe, you know. And so that lives in my aesthetic pretty well. I tend to work on a lot of classical material, but and I was not the original scheduled director, but you know, big university administrative things happen, and so yeah, it is a different challenge for me, as opposed to, say, for example, working on Magdalen Park Shakespeare Festival, where I take a 2.5-3 hour play and I say, okay, we're going to cut it down to 85 minutes. So what are the elements I absolutely have to keep to tell the story? And the audience is very informal, sitting on picnic blankets, moving around, kids are playing. We even create deliberately distractions to remind the audience how informal they're allowed to be. And so then I think, how can I grab them for this moment? How can I grab them for that moment? And we have very little control of the lights, and we have very little control of, you know, we're doing the whole thing on a really small budget. And so the answer is almost always laughter. I'm going to get them by, if I can get the people sitting closest to go, oh, that's when, then the people in the back will go, hey, people are, what are we, right? Laughter and because at Magdalen Park we mostly do comedies, laughter and or comedic violence, right? That sounds terrible.
Slapstick stuff.
Slapstick, that's what I'm really trying to say. I mean, there was literally a moment in the 12th night we just did where, you know, Feste the Jester would come out with an inflatable bat and beat on Malvolio, and then have more inflatable bats that we would hand out to kids. Briefly. Right, and it was just a hugely successful moment in the show, because by then we have taught the audience to not take it very seriously.
Yeah.
Right? We have brought their expectations down, and they're all drinking Chardonnay, and they're all eating wine and cheese, and you know, and that is a very different project than producing 2 hours and saying, no, I'm gonna show you something beautiful.
Yeah, well, our art has this kind of multivalent sort of. It's multivalent in that way. It has, you know, direct entertainment value. You know,
of course.
So you want to entertain people and get a laugh and get people to have fun and have this interlude, right? The aesthetic experience can be this kind of break from the grind of everydayness.
Or make it worse.
But then
sometimes.
but then art has this potential, you know, for striking us way more deeply than the entertainment value.
I agree 100%.
So this is what I'm getting to with the appreciation part, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's different challenges as a director. You know, is this primarily going to be entertainment value? No, we're going to get the whole family involved, or are you striking a deeper chord? You want people to appreciate this on a much deeper level, that this is going to challenge their own.
Why are you drawn to conflict?
I think it's exciting. And I also think that it is at the heart of pretty much all of our stories. It's an incredibly useful creative tool, right? I don't know if you have a favorite story or a play or whatever, but like you're given a script and you say, okay, it's my job as an actor, a director, a designer, whatever, to put on this script. I better be able to answer I better be able to say the central conflict of this show is what? For example, in the MF with the Hat, I sat down and I read it several times and I said, the central conflict of this show is, will Jackie, the fundamentally main character, and Veronica be able to save their relationship or not? And everything else are valuable, important subplots, but that is at the heart of every question. Can Jackie save his relationship with Veronica? And once, as a director, you grab that and say, that is the heart of this story, you get to, it becomes a unifying and very usefully limiting principle, so that when new ideas jump into your head or other craftspeople bring you new ideas, you can say, does that serve to support this fundamental conflict, or does it distract from it? And that's how I know whether to sort of green light it or not. And so when a project comes along wherein there isn't so obviously a central conflict, I struggle more to figure out, okay.
It becomes conflicting.
Yeah. Someone brings me a cool idea, because lots of ideas are cool, lots of ideas are exciting, lots of ideas are fun. Someone brings me a cool idea, and I don't have a really convenient question to ask myself. Okay, should that shirt be green or red? Does it support, that's a pretty abstract question, but, does it support this central conflict in some way? Does it draw the audience's attention back to this central conflict, or does it diffuse from it? And I don't have that without that fundamental question to answer.
I would like to step away from that and say too much conflict in a story, right? So it has to be the idea of balance. It seems to me that there has to be conflict, but not too much of it. Conflict in and of itself is not, it's how much of it. If you have too little, like you were saying, it's harder, too little conflict. But if you have too much conflict, it seems like it would be, can you have too much conflict?
You can certainly have too many conflicts, right? That becomes distracting.
Too much drama?
I mean, like, what would you say is the central conflict of Hamlet? Will Hamlet avenge his father's death? Presumably. That strikes me as the fundamental conflict of Hamlet, most likely. Although I've actually never done Hamlet. That's just me talking, because it's just such a story that so many people know. That doesn't mean that every single moment of the play only lives in that space. That's the trunk, and then there are all these branches that go out from that central conflict, but they all need that central conflict to survive, kind of. Can you have too much conflict? I would say that for the actor playing Hamlet, there's no limit to how important you make that conflict internally, right? If you're the actor playing Hamlet, that's a life or death decision. And so I would say, can you have too much conflict? You can have too many conflicts. Thus, the audience loses track of what to kind of pay attention to, and you start losing that shared experience. but I don't think you can have too much conflict.
I see what you're saying. Right.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to make the central conflict too important.
Right.
Yeah. Gosh, you're making me think there's certain amounts of homework I need to go do.
And the reason I ask is because, right, in the average person's life, the challenges, right, the conflicts, the problems that we have to deal with, sometimes are overwhelming. The tragedies that people experience in their lives, they can be overwhelming. And
yes,
and
absolutely.
I would think that most people, I could be wrong, conflict is challenging. We're not particularly drawn to, I can't wait today, I'm gonna, at the office, I'm gonna have conflict, you know?
I think most of us try to
It would
avoid
be nice
conflict.
not to, right?
Yeah.
But I agree, right? Without conflict, without challenges, then we might not. Sometimes it's the challenge that allows us to grow.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And so
We might wish to avoid conflict, but the act of conflict might help us become, hopefully, better people. That would be the most noble goal, right? To become better people, more generous with ourselves, more resilient,
kinder,
perhaps better
better,
at a specific skill in some
smarter.
cases.
Who knows? Hopefully.
Well, can I change the stream a bit? Then, can I?
There's conflict.
There's conflict. Can we use this conflict to become
this
better
is a
people,
diversion
better
here.
philosophers?
Well-
So what strikes me here, and where you got in your dialogue with Jay about conflict is, do you perceive the work that you do? Do you consciously perceive that there's an ethics involved? I mean, that you're working. So we dealt pretty comprehensively with beauty, I think, at least at the beginning.
Not yet, because
We're getting towards the end
Yes,
here.
I know, but I'm drawing attention to something that most people would. Conflict is not good, and the ethics,
But
right?
the ethics
Right.
part of it, right?
Conflict is not good. We would prefer if it wasn't around, but it gives us the opportunity to grow. It gives the characters the opportunity to grow.
No, but here's my point, if I
And
can interrupt. It's the
You've
ethics
already
part.
interrupted.
All right, go ahead.
And so what I'm going with this is this overlap of the emotions, the tragedy. I wanted to come back to tragedy, to the negative, right? To emotions that most of us would prefer not to feel too strongly. Sadness, betrayal. I don't particularly like it when I'm betrayed. I don't know about others. In your craft, are able to draw on those emotions that are negative to create an overall sense of beauty and
Yeah, but in the sense of the good. So this is what I was trying to get at is, do you have a sense as a director that the work that you do has ethical implications, or that it helps people work through issues? When people come as an audience, like they're coming to see,
be entertained.
maybe not a morality play per se, right? But there's a lesson to be learned through the conflict that gets played out on the stage, or the resolution or not that happens.
Or a
the
connection.
tragic ending, or the comedic ending.
Even just a connection, that sometimes there's loose ends.
Yeah. Or, I mean, there are playwrights and directors who, consciously use the stage to make, political and ethical sorts of
Absolutely.
motions, I'm thinking
Absolutely.
Bertolt
It's a-
Brecht here, and people like that.
Sure, yeah. Brecht being a classical example, but there are plenty of extremely current examples.
Right.
And I would say that the stage is an excellent place to I mean, look, the crucible right?
Exactly.
The famous,
Right.
famous play, The Crucible, was in fact a commentary on the House on Un-American Activities Committee. Those hearings, that whole. Speaking of Brecht, The Crucible was, of course, written by Arthur Miller, but I mean, of that whole blacklisting movement. The Crucible was, in fact, written about that. And not that The Crucible is current. I mean, The Crucible was written in, the late 50s, I believe, or early 60s. Anyway, that I am aware of, I do feel a strong sense of responsibility to the audience. I definitely feel a sense of responsibility to the audience, but my responsibility is to deliver the heart of the story to them in the way that they kind of are most able to agree on as a collective. I am not in the situation where I am often picking my own material, right? Like the MF with the hat. Someone contacted me and said, I want to do this thing and I'd like to hire you to direct it. And I said, oh, that's a really exciting story. And then I directed a wonderful comedy up in Utah this year called One Man, Two Governors. Someone contacted me and said, I'd like to hire you to come do that. And I said, oh, I love that. It's a completely different experience. Okay, Twelfth Night, which I chose and co-created the bilingual adaptation for Madeline Park Shakespeare Festival, but we are the Madeline Park Shakespeare Festival, so I'm looking at the canon of Shakespeare to source and then create an adaptation. And then again, there's a committee that chooses the stories for me for us at Utep. I'm of course on that committee. I have a voice on that committee. I'm not taking myself out of that story entirely. So when I get a script, I have a strong belief that I need to serve the audience by finding the heart of that story, regardless of what that heart is, and revealing it to the audience. And my fantasy is that if I've got 100 people in the audience, the 100 people will have a sort of community experience because of that. That they will all kind of have that same rhythm, get the same breath, have the same heartbeats, laugh at approximately the same moments. There are people out there who would say to you, well, art is so subjective that if there's 100 different experiences of the same story, that's okay. And there's some truth in that. There will be 100 different experiences of the same story, but it's my job to sort of bring them together to create that communal experience. I am actually fairly agnostic about genre and theme, right? I mean, during the Me Too movement, I'm not going to go into the details, but during the Me Too movement, someone contacted me and said, we'd like you to direct Streetcar Named Desire. A wonderful play. Dare I say it, a beautiful play. But that has a strong misogynistic narrative at its core, and I'm kind of a cishet male. And I said, I don't think this is the time for that. And I don't want that play to go away. And I said, and I don't think I'm the right person to direct it. If you're going to do it, I don't think I'm the right person right now. So I guess that's an exception to what I'm saying. But by and large, I try and be quite agnostic about message, genre. I want to go see. I want to direct something wonderful. I want to go see something wonderful, and I'm perfectly willing to be completely surprised at where it comes from. We just produced at Utep the play Postdata, and when the original concept was described to me, I was not over the moon about the larger idea, but I trusted all the artists working on it, and then there was actually some change in personnel, and then the final production, I saw it last Sunday, and I was like, that was terrific, right? So I really avoid trying to, I try to stay very agnostic about genre, about message. Kip Marlowe wrote a play called Edward II. You might have heard of it. It's very much adjacent to a Shakespeare piece. He was a contemporary of Shakespeare. And a wonderful director, produced it in San Francisco. This was many years ago. I ended up out there seeing it. And this particular director decided to basically take the story and use it entirely as an exploration of LGBTQ themes at the time. It was about 1998 or 99. And took this classical play and said, I'm going to make this entirely a story about LGBTQ themes. And it was wonderful, right? And I might have been inclined to go into it saying, well, that's not the play that Kip Marlowe wrote, but the director was so clear in his vision and so personally connected to that, and he was so daring, and it turns out that was all supported in the language, whether I had seen it as a reader or not. And I mean, I was just like, right? Might I have originally said that would be a great idea with that particular rather old dusty script? I might have said to you, you can probably find a better play to tell that story with. I would have been wrong, right? So I've learned, go see it. Go see it and decide if it's, what a great production will make me love the experience regardless of the genre. I mean, okay, again, that being said, I declined, for reasons I hope that are clear, I declined Streetcar Named Desire. It just felt wrong at that time. So here I am contradicting myself one sentence later.
This is we have to end now.
Terrific.
It's a great note to end on, because we started off with this kind of very complex analysis of beauty and theater, and here we got to this kind of contradictory state on your part.
Yes.
Conflicting.
This conflicting state of how you deal with ethics in your directorial work, right?
Yeah.
And the imperative for our audience to come see it. Come see the plays that you're directing.
Oh, yes.
This was a beautiful dialogue. Thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you so much for having me in. I really enjoyed it. And I'll see you at the dog park.
Oh, maybe we'll have to come with a very strong leash on Romeo.
An interesting exploration of conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
This has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera. My name is Kim Diaz.
Jules Simon and our guest, Jay Stratton. Thank you very much,
Please
Jay.
join us next time.